Evan, you're considerably younger than most people that go through having prostate cancer. How old are you?
So 53 now, 52 when I got diagnosed and had the surgery.
Definitely a young fella.
Yeah, compared to normal, or what we perceive as normal.
So what made you decide to get checked up, or how did it happen?
Yeah, so back in September 2021, my wife Holly and I just decided we've been thinking for a while just about sort of moving towards a healthier way of living, and we started to see a naturopath at that time. And one of the first things she wanted to do was just get a full set of bloods just to sort of establish, I guess, a baseline of where we were at the time, to then know what to do moving forward. And as part of that set of bloods, it showed an elevated PSA level. And so then it was a case of following that up with my GP, and the journey started from that point. So I guess we came across it by accident.
Yeah.
There was nothing indicating that I had any symptoms or anything.
So you felt completely normal?
Completely. Yeah, absolutely.
So since you found out, well, how did that sort of unfold? Like, so you had your PSA levels checked.
Yeah.
Your GP, what called you into the
Yeah,
clinic?
it was quite a long process, I guess, to get to the diagnosis. So as I said, it was September that we had the elevated PSA.
Do you remember what your PSA levels were?
Yeah, so it was 3.2.
Yeah.
At the
just
start,
a little bit
so
higher.
anything over 3 for someone my age, they said needed follow up. So we followed up with the GP, and then after a couple of other blood tests just to confirm it, went to see a private urologist here in Hervey Bay, knowing that the public system to deal with that here was not there. You had to go down to Brisbane, and the wait times were quite lengthy, so we just chose to go and see a private urologist here. It was then I've got to say, he was quite comprehensive in the tests that he did. So I had every scan under the sun, PET scans and MRIs and ultrasounds and continuous blood tests and that.
Very fortunate to have found him.
Well, yeah, lucky. And I guess, it was something that once it sort of happened that it was a possibility, it was about being very proactive and getting these tests done. So we had all of those done between September and April the following year in 2022. And it was in January that I had a blood test done, and my PSA had gone up to about 3.7, 3.8. And that sort of moved things along a bit more quickly. Yep. That was when we had the PET scan to see if it had spread anywhere else, and booked in for
What was the result of the PET scan?
So there was nothing showing anywhere else in the body. The final, obviously, procedure that I had was the biopsy. And that showed that when they divided the prostate into 6 regions, there was cancer in 4 of them. My score...
Your Gleason score?
Gleason score. Got my name. Gleason score. Was sort of sitting high 7s. So it was at the wrong end of the scale, and particularly for what I felt someone my age. And I remember the urologist saying, well, look, if we don't treat it, you've probably got 10 years. So it's about then finding a treatment option.
Yeah. What sort of treatments were discussed?
Yeah, so obviously prostate removal, the radical prostatectomy, and then options around chemo and radiation particularly.
How did you feel about those options?
Oh, gee, neither desirable. Obviously, the side effects of both are very different. I think the thing that swayed me was, given my age, having the radiation meant that surgical options in the future, if it returned, were quite limited.
So at least they made you aware of those implications? Yeah.
Yeah, look, they did. I guess in that whole process, again, we had to be really proactive and ask a lot of questions, because I guess you get told something like that and you're in a bit of shock. And I think for a lot of people, that's probably where they might stay. I was fortunate, I guess, that Holly and myself are very sort of proactive people and look for answers and just don't accept what we're told. So it was really about pushing to get as much information as we could to make the best decision for us moving forward. And I think one of the things also that impacted on that was, you know, you mentioned earlier that I'm young or in the younger cohort to have prostate cancer. And typically everyone says, oh, you know, yeah, I've got a mate, you know, Joe, he's 80 and he's, you know, lived with prostate cancer and he's fine. And it's like, that's good. If I was 80 and was given 10 years, I'd be okay with that. But I didn't want to check out at 62. So we sort of, for that reason, just really went into it as much as we could to get the best information to make the best decision.
I think that's really, really important that you do be sort of actively participating in your own sort of wellness journey. It's a lot of people do just sort of freeze, as you said, and just go with the flow of what they're told to do, and that's usually either cutting it out and radiating and poisoning it.
And I think they just, and it's, look, I think they trust the system, and I don't want to say you shouldn't trust any of it, but I just don't think there's all, in our experience anyway, there wasn't enough for me to have a high level of trust that I was comfortable. And we had to ask more questions. And I suppose there's a lot of people go through this, and I suppose in how the system deals with it is it's a percentage game. It's a lot of people come through, and it's, well, we'll give you as much information as you need, and that sort of thing. And I just think, you know, when it's as serious as cancer, it's your own responsibility to make the decision and get the information to make that decision.
Yeah. That day that you got diagnosed, how did that happen?
Oh God!
Was it by telephone call? Wasn't it?
Yeah, it was bizarre actually. So we'd had the biopsy up at St Stephen's Hospital, and I had an appointment to go back to the urologist about 2 weeks after that to get the results. Now, my urologist at the time, after every appointment I'd had with him, we'd sit there while he would dictate a letter to my GP. So I knew my GP was getting an update every time we saw him. And I know that he dictated in that letter that he had a follow-up session with me to deliver the results to me. Anyway, it was probably about a week after that, and a week before I was meant to see him, that I was just at work one day and got a phone call from a GP, and she just said, oh, gee, it's important that you follow up with your urologist because you've got cancer. And I just went, fuck, like, A, fuck, because I've got cancer, and B, fuck, because I can't believe you just told me. Like, you didn't check where I was. You didn't check that I might have had someone around me to support and then tell me. It was just blurted out over the phone, and I just...
My God, just so casual, just like
the
laundromat,
very blasé.
Like the laundromat calling you to say they've lost a pair of your underpants
Yeah,
or something.
exactly. Yeah, it was just... I just couldn't believe it, and so it was... Yeah, it was sort of quite upsetting because then I was like in a situation where I was at work with Holly and I needed to tell her, but then we had staff around and all of that, and it was just sort of... It wasn't the moment I anticipated of getting that information. But anyway, that's what it was. Not desirable.
No. So you went home with Holly, you discussed...
We went and sat by the beach.
Yeah.
Probably for a good couple of hours and just tried to process and think through. Because I suppose up until that point, and after every test I'd gone through, the numbers weren't moving in the right direction, but I just had thought, look, we're going to get to the end of this testing and it's going to be okay. Yeah. You know?
Couldn't happen to me.
But that wasn't the case. So, we just sat down by the beach and, cried and didn't do the why me stuff, but just sort of thought, well, shit, what do we do now, you know? And how are we going to get through this? And because so that was in May. We had a wedding coming up in the September that we were planning for, and lots of stuff happening at work. We own our own business, so there was lots of other things on in our life navigate through without having
never
this.
a good time for a cancer diagnosis, but just before,
No.
was it but 3 or 4 months before you got married?
Yeah.
So you took quite a obviously a proactive approach, but you also, in conversations I had with you and Holly, it was you took quite a humorous approach as well.
Yeah. We gave the cancer a name, so we called him Colin, and the plan we had was that we were going to evict Colin.
Yeah, I like that.
Get him out. And look, I think, everyone's different in how they deal with things. And for us, it was about, I guess because what we do for work and where we have worked previously, we've navigated through lots of changes in big organisations and government system changes and that sort of thing. And so we sort of adopted that sort of approach to it, to have a plan and to work to it.
Logical.
Yep. And I think the other key thing around it was to build a team of people around us to help us work through, because we knew that there would be peaks and troughs. So it was our GP in terms of the referral stuff to get us to the hospital, but it was our naturopath. My physio, who I'd been seeing for shoulder work for a long time, when I told her, she said, "Oh, great, I do a lot of rehab for men who have the prostatectomy, so great, let's get into the exercises, that are going to help you, the pelvic floor exercises and all of that." So had her, yourself, to guide us on some nutrition, and particularly as we move towards following a keto diet to help lose weight and that sort of thing, and friends. And then I engaged a psychologist as well, because one of the things that happened to me pretty shortly afterwards, and I've never had it in my life, I've never been close to being anxious about anything, but I developed really bad anxiety, and it was debilitating. And I'd worked with people who'd had it, and I'd always empathised, about how sort of stressful that must be and how debilitating, but I'd never experienced it. And I got to a point where, even coming to the coffee shop, and I'd be sitting here having a coffee, and I'd just have to leave and sit in the car just crying because I couldn't drive. And it was overwhelming. It just was like a flood of emotion that would come to the surface. And things like at home, I've cooked dinner nearly every night of my life since I left home, and I've worked as a cook in kitchens and all of that sort of thing, but I would have to make a list of how to cook dinner step by step to follow, because my mental capacity just wasn't there to be able to do something that I normally just do sort of robotically almost, So I engaged with a psychologist to help with that. And then the final thing was, fortunately or unfortunately, I'd connected with friends of Holly's several months before, and one of them had cancer and was only given a couple of months to live. But they guided us very much towards, or guided me anyway, to exploring spirituality. And I was so bloody glad that they did, because that helped a lot with everything that we put around us. But it was me being able to find what I could connect to that gave me peace and contentment, and reassurance, and for me that's the outdoors, it's the environment and some crystals associated with that. And so whenever I'd have moments of anxiety and Holly was there, it was about putting rainforest music on, and she'd put the crystals on my chest, and we'd just work through it to sort of deal with it. And I think, going back to how we dealt with it, it was important for us to have a plan, which was the real methodical stuff, but the team of people around us gave us help and strategies to deal with the peaks and troughs that happened throughout those few months, and
so it was really a multifaceted approach. It wasn't just cut it out. It was working on your health, because you had some pretty significant health increases or benefits over that 3 months.
Yeah, I did.
Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, so I was carrying a lot of weight, and in the 4 months before the surgery, I lost 20 kilos. And I think most of the indicators in my bloods sort of hit normal levels or below, where they certainly not high levels.
What happened to your PSA level over that time?
And the PSA level did drop back down to sort of low threes.
Isn't that amazing?
It was amazing. And I think in the absence of knowing about the biopsy, I'd look at that and go, oh, well, I'm okay. However, tempering that is, just jumping ahead a bit, when I had the surgery, they did the analysis of the prostate and they'd found 5% more aggressive cells had developed since I'd had the biopsy. So, but I think certainly food, diet, lifestyle gave me the most significant health benefits. Yeah. And I think the other thing that did for me was one of the goals in our plan was for me to get surgery fit.
Yeah.
And so it was about being in the best shape physically and mentally to go through the surgery and then to recover. And so we worked with our naturopath on, for her it was about getting our blood clean, and coupled with all the diet and those sorts of things. And I've got to say that doing all of that, having the plan and asking our friends for help and having that support network around us, on the morning that I went into the surgery at 8 o'clock, I was at my peak mentally. I don't think I've been mentally stronger in my entire life. Wow. Then I went into there. I'd done some visualisation work with our naturopath just a few days before, and I'd seen in my mind positive outcomes for the surgery, and I carried that through, and I went in there just thinking, yep, got this, going to evict Colin today, and the fucker's gone, and great.
Have an eviction party.
And I woke up, that night after surgery, and I felt great, and so that approach to it for us, not saying that would work for everyone, but I certainly think we didn't leave any stone unturned. I think I relied on Holly, and she was an enormous strength. We relied on our friends, and we asked for help a lot, which we don't normally do, but just having strategies in place and lifestyle choices to help cope with the peaks and troughs and be healthy and well was the best thing we could have done by far.
Being proactive with knowing what to ask doctors, sometimes being a little bit like the squeaky wheel, you've
got to keep going. Yeah,
you do need to push. I mean, it's your health, and it's the outcome could possibly be life or death.
And I think
people are too pleasant and trying to be too nice to not push a doctor because they think that they're busy, they've got a busy schedule, so I shouldn't really take too much of their time, and they forget to ask things, and I think it could be the difference between a positive or a negative outcome. But the fact that you handled it so many different ways, you looked at your health and you didn't go backwards. You actually improved your health considerably over those 3 or 4 months.
Yep.
You sort of took it into your own hands and you actually managed to improve.
And it took a lot of discipline, but that was required. And I think just going back to what you're talking about not pushing, I had one instance down at the hospital in Brisbane, and one of the first visits there, and they said, oh, well, because my weight was quite high, they said, oh, they won't do it unless you're under 100 kilos. And it was like, and at that stage they were talking surgery by January. And this was in sort of June, July, and I thought, how the hell am I going to lose a third of my body weight? And if they don't do surgery, what happens to me? Like, what if this... Because then it's that irrational thought processes that start coming in about, well, what if the cancer starts spreading, and, what if it's one of those anomalies that I don't have 10 years and actually, bang, it's only 2, and all of that sort of stuff. And when we went back and actually met with the surgeon and said that, he said, oh, no, that's not right. Who told you that? And it's like, that 6 weeks between those 2 appointments was so freaking stressful.
Yeah.
All because they'd given the wrong information. And we, again, being proactive, and particularly Holly, like we jumped on a couple of Facebook groups, and she jumped on a Facebook, a wives group. So it's just the wives, because it affects both of you, both pre-op and post-op. That's a reality. So we were getting lots of good information from people who'd been through it, able to ask questions and that sort of thing. So again, just different sources of information were just so important to allow us to go back and ask questions and challenge and that sort of stuff. So you shouldn't be afraid to push. You do it respectfully, but
That's right. There's nothing wrong with asking for a second opinion.
absolutely not.
So what local support groups have you come in contact with or joined?
Yeah. Well, there is a local prostate cancer support group here. It's very small. They meet once a month. And I think Holly found that on Facebook. The interesting thing was that going to GP through the hospital and the urologist, no one told us about that. And yet the waiting rooms are full of men with prostate issues. And the support group here was really good and a wealth of information. And it's interesting now when you see people come into that group who've just been diagnosed. I think, my God, that's what I must have looked like, rabbit in the headlights, full of fear, not knowing what was going to happen. And we got a lot of good information there. Fortunately, the local cancer nurse, prostate cancer nurse, came to the group one day and we were able to talk with her, and she was excellent. Gave us a lot of really good information. And then also the men there who'd been through it previously, and one in particular that we've become friends with. He reached out to us just to offer to have a cup of coffee with me and that, which was fantastic and helped a lot to hear his story and his journey, because he was also only 52 when he had prostate cancer, and his journey's been very different to mine, but the information he gave was fantastic. And sadly, they meet in a dingy little room, and it just there should be more people going to it, because that support is invaluable to get information, even about things like, if you go down to Brisbane to have surgery, like where to stay, because Holly doesn't like driving in Brisbane, so it was finding somewhere near the hospital but had everything there that we needed, because you stay for 2 weeks afterwards, after surgery. And so it's not only information about like the prostate cancer itself, it's all the other things that you need to know to take the stress out of going through that experience.
And meeting people who have been through it is incredibly valuable.
Oh, it's so important.
Yeah, and having that support when you're feeling down, if you want to share information, it's definitely encourage people to join a support group. And Facebook seems to be the way that most people go.
It does.
Yeah.
And look, traditionally men aren't great at talking about this stuff. And we're talking about a very sensitive area, because it does have impact on erectile function and incontinence and all of those sorts of things that come with having your prostate removed. And so to be able to talk with people who've gone through that, and there's no judgment, there's no embarrassment, it's just natural to talk about it because it's something you've experienced, and that is so important, because I think I don't know how people cope if they're not able to talk about it with anyone, because I know for me, like, my head would go stir crazy. Having people to talk about it with is so incredibly important.
And having that stress, bottling it up within you, just makes things so much worse.
Absolutely.
It increases your cortisol levels, then you don't sleep, you can't recover, your cells can't regenerate. So really talking to people is a huge advantage to just let go of that release.
There's a significant health benefit. Yeah, absolutely.
And 52 is quite young and it's quite uncommon, but unfortunately it's becoming slightly more common, isn't it?
It absolutely is, and most of the cases that we see now when people are sort of talking about it, particularly through the Facebook group, the Prostate Cancer Australia, it's younger and younger people diagnosed with it. And again, people who've not had symptoms. And I know in my case, like I had no symptoms, and if I hadn't have gone and had that test, I might not have had any symptoms until 9 years down the track, and by that time, it's too late.
Well, it's usually the secondary complications from the cancer, not the actual cancer. So your prostate tumour can swell and you won't even know too much until it's pressing on an organ or something like that. And that's when people present themselves to the hospital. It's why it's so important to be proactive with prostate cancer. But I don't think a lot of guys want to have a finger stuck up their bum, but it's not. You don't have to start with the finger up the bum. It's a simple blood test, just to.
And that's the thing. It's just you know, I would encourage strongly people just annual blood check, you know, and ask the doctor, push the doctors for it.
Yeah.
Like, because
Every time
you
I
need
get
to.
a blood test, I get my inflammation markers checked.
Yep.
I get my PSA checked. And the last time I asked for the PSA, because I go to a doctor now, it's not like when I was growing up, we always had the same doctor.
Yeah, yeah.
Her name was Doctor Who, H.U. So a Chinese lady, and she
Yeah.
knew our family inside and out. So
Yeah.
every time we went there, she knew what was the go. But now I go to a clinic and I see a different doctor every time.
Yep.
And I said, I want to get my PSA levels checked. And he said, why? You're 44. And I said, my dad died of prostate cancer.
Yep.
I want to get my PSA levels checked, please. And I'd like to get my inflammation markers, and I'd like to test my testosterone levels. I want to check everything because it doesn't cost them much, you know. And it can give you a bigger picture. And if one level is elevated, then you can start looking at the other ones and see a bigger picture. But they tend to only really check for cancer markers. So they'll check for PSA or CEA. They won't check, you know, liver function and the other things, which then they could link together and see, well, if one's high, why is there another one high, and then you can link them together. But it's a bit of a shame. But
it's a real shame because I think it's a shame that you have to push for doctors to do it because you know it's your right. But I think the thing is, and I had to be really firm with people when I first got the diagnosis because it is considered an old man's disease. And I really had to, and it wasn't anything personal, but it was, I had to say to people right from the start, don't tell me about John, you know, down the road who's 80 who's got prostate cancer, because what I discovered really quickly was everyone is so different in their diagnosis, and PSA levels can be from, like mine, which was high 3s, up to 20 into the hundreds, you know, so it's not like everyone's the same and we all sit in that sort of little range of, you know, between 3 and 4. It's very different for everyone. And it's just, you can't ignore the fact now that it's one of the most common cancers in men in Australia.
Yeah.
And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's about 9 men a day get diagnosed with prostate cancer. And they're younger and younger, and it impacts so significantly on someone's life. And like all cancer, but
especially someone that's younger. So if you get diagnosed with cancer and you're 50 or less than 50, your cells regenerate much faster, your growth hormone levels are higher, so the cancer spreads much faster. So, you know, they typically say don't bother getting your prostate checked until you're 50. But if you get it when you're 40, if you don't get diagnosed properly and you're 40 and you get to 45, it's already advanced.
Yes.
So I think even in your late 30s, it's worth getting your PSA levels checked on a yearly basis.
Yeah.
Because it just moves so much faster in younger people.
And like you say, it's all the other areas as well, inflammation markers and all of those sorts of things, because, I mean, your health, you only get one crack at it.
That's right. You only got one body.
Yeah. And I think, you know, well, certainly I wasn't through school. I mean, it was the food pyramid and be healthy and wear sunscreen and all of that sort of stuff.
Eat less, move more.
Yeah, that's it, you know, and it was, as I said, men typically don't sort of talk about it or go and get things checked, and they think it is the finger up the backside, and certainly that happened, but that was well after blood tests and all that sort of thing, although he did buy me flowers, so that was okay. But it is, and I think it's just in your own benefit, because if it's too late, it's too late.
That's right, and I think possibly one of the reasons why prostate cancer is, I think the stats, I'm not 100%, but I think it's 24,000 people men in Australia got prostate cancer last year, and 20,000 cases of breast cancer.
Yes.
And I wonder if it's because men are just a little bit more reluctant to go to the doctors. We're a little less likely to complain. Yeah, we don't want to talk about it.
No.
It's not very glamorous having a finger stuck up the bum.
Yep.
Boobs are a lot more glamorous than that. And I'm not saying that breast cancer, rightfully so, gets a lot of press and support.
Absolutely. And
we've got Movember now, which supports prostate cancer. But I just don't think people are talking about it as much between the men to men. You know,
that's right.
Like I probably wouldn't sit down and have a beer with you and say, "Have you had a finger up your bum lately?" But maybe we should say, like, have you had should it be more common to speak to your friends about? I mean, I talk about it all the time because I'm a nutritionist, and I see people and I ask them to get their bloods, and if they're male and over the age of 40, I'll definitely recommend that they get them tested if they haven't before.
For sure.
I'm not going to put my finger up the bum, but they have to go to have to go to a doctor or buy me, as you say, flowers or dinner first. But I think, I do wonder whether that because we don't talk so much, we're probably a little later with diagnosis. It's hard because, like with breast cancer, you can feel it, you can self-analyse.
Yes.
Whereas it's hard.
It's difficult to self, but
yeah.
However, there might be symptoms around, getting up and going to the toilet a lot at night, or erectile dysfunction, or those sorts of things that mightn't be the 6 beers you've had that night, or something like that. And it's just a fact; those things happen. But look, I think you're right. It is about talking about it more, and I do now. Like with everyone, I just say, look, at least annually, get your PSA. And I think doctors, the medical system has to be at the forefront. Like you say, there's more men diagnosed with this than breast cancer, and the doctors shouldn't argue why not to have the test. And I think most men would go to the doctor and say, could I get my PSA checked? Oh no, you don't need to do that till you're 50. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Rather than saying,
with your
no,
doctor.
hang on, I want this, and that sort of thing. But it needs to be more of a conversation. And I think part of the problem too is typically when you see any sort of media around prostate cancer, they show old men.
Yeah.
Again, and so people think, oh, I'm not that old.
Yeah,
I'll never have it.
I don't need to check yet.
We need to bring younger men into the picture and into the visual
that's
stimuli
a really good point.
of how this is all presented. To say this isn't just old men who are 80. This is young blokes, tradies, sportsmen.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't discriminate.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
So how's your life changed since? So you were diagnosed, you had it removed, you didn't have to do any chemo?
No, so had it removed in October last year, 2022. So it was about a month and a bit after our wedding. So we had our wedding and that was really good. Had the surgery. They were confident that they had good margins around it. So in the post-op analysis of the prostate.
What a relief.
Great relief. And the PSA tests I've had done since then, it's non-detectable, so 0.008 something, which is the standard. So that's been really good. You still have some side effects from the surgery.
Yeah.
So fortunately for me, because my physio got me onto pelvic floor exercises early, next to no incontinence issues.
And you were able to consummate the wedding?
Yes, thank
the
God.
marriage.
Had the surgery after that, which was good. So.
Oh yes, of course.
Yeah. So, but look, one of the things after surgery is erectile dysfunction, and that takes a long time to recover. So that's something you have to deal with and get your head around, and that's.
Was it discussed with you in very much detail before you had the operation?
It was discussed because we asked a lot of questions.
Yeah. Do you think it would have been discussed?
Probably not in as much detail. Yeah. We really, I mean, they show you a diagram and, this is, where your prostate is and it affects that, and that's why that happens. And in the surgery, we've just got to try and preserve the nerves because the prostate is small and it's, I think one person said, it's like trying to peel wet tissue paper off. That's how delicate the nerve bundle is around the prostate, and if they're damaged, that's what can cause the erectile dysfunction. So they said they were able to preserve most of my nerves, which was good. But I think, that part of the conversation is in the early days, and then by the time you get to surgery, if you haven't sort of understood it more.
You haven't nutted it out?
Exactly, yeah. And I remember when we were driving down to Brisbane for our second appointment at the hospital, and Holly and I were talking about that, and it was just like, shit, we don't know enough about that. And we started sort of Googling stuff and information and diagrams and that sort of thing, and came up with a lot more questions by the time we got to the hospital to ask them and that sort of thing. So you go into it knowing that that's a reality of the outcome. And you sort of, you hold out hope and you have good days and bad days with all of that. But it's a very strange situation, that because you can still have an orgasm without having function. It's weird. So that's putting it all out there. But
there you go. You learn something new every day.
Yeah, it is. It's really strange.
I'll always remember my dad. My dad got prostate cancer when he was 68, and he went to the doctor and they said, look, we're going to have to perform surgery, and one of the side effects is possible erectile dysfunction.
Yep.
And I said to him, so what are you going to do, Dad? And he goes, well, I've got a girlfriend who'd separated from Mum.
Yep.
Had a girlfriend who was 50, and he still wanted to get a hard on. And I said, Dad, get the fucking operation. I said, you're no good to anyone. You can't get a stiffy if you're 6 feet down under in a box. Yep. What's the use of it? You know. And anyway, he did have the surgery, and then he went on to sort of hormone therapy, and he passed away when he was 79, and had very good years after that.
And there's treatments for it all and that sort of thing, and it's just something that takes time, and again, different for every person in sort of how they sort of bounce back, so to speak. And
but it's amazing how common that is. That I've spoken to a lot of people that have refused surgery because they would rather have a hard on for 5 years.
Yeah.
But they know I know, you know, and these are a couple of people I can think of. They were only in their early 60s.
Yep.
And I thought, you know, but each to their own, isn't it?
Oh, look, it is, and that's the sort of stuff you've got to weigh up, and you've got to, again, you have to get as much information as you can to go into it with your eyes wide open.
Yeah.
And accept the pros and cons, you know, because you are talking about your life, and you need to weigh up what's most important to you. And for me, having a longer life with Holly is far more important, and you just, you know, things happen differently, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But you know, since the surgery, just going back to your question, life's good. You know, we've stuck on the healthy way of living and advanced that more, and we really cherish our life. I mean, we did before. You know, we were pretty positive about our life and how we live it, but now even more so. And I think some things changed for us throughout the journey. Different people left our life and different people came into our life. Why that happened, I don't know, but it just did. And we focus so much more now on positive energy being a significant part of our life, because, like you were saying before, stress can have such a negative impact on your health.
Yeah.
And we really focus now on being around people who bring a positive energy into our world, being really healthy, that spiritual side of things, just to get that peace and contentment so that you're not wound up and stressed about things. So, and I've learned a lot about myself on the journey, you know, and in some ways it sounds bizarre, like it's happened for a reason.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it is yet. And ironically enough, just when you asked about the diagnosis, that morning before I went into work, I was sitting in this coffee shop and a friend had given me a book called The Universe Has a Plan. And I'd just started reading that book. And I read it for about half an hour. I read the first chapter and then went, and half an hour later got my diagnosis, and I just went, fucking universe has a plan. Don't know what it is, but shit. And, you know, so there will be a reason for it. Do I wish it hadn't have happened? Bloody oath. I'd rather not go through it. But I have to believe that it's happened for some reason, and I'll be a better person for that.
Is there anything you would have done differently, or anything you wish that you had done differently?
You know, it wasn't that long ago. We went to a retreat, and it was a wellness retreat, and we had that conversation. You know, we said, I wonder what would have been different if I'd not had the surgery, if I'd gone for radiation, or, you know. And I think for probably about an hour, I sat there and I wondered seriously, and I sort of became quite emotional. But I think when I weigh everything up, I don't think I would do anything differently. I wouldn't have made a different decision about my course of treatment. I wouldn't have approached it any differently. I think having that plan and working methodically and having a great group of people around us to help manage through those times when you're quite flat and that was so important. And I think for the people who are in our life now, we're so grateful for that. So I don't think I would have done anything differently.
I think you had a very good outcome.
Yeah.
And as you said before, I think you've grown so much.
Yes.
I've watched you during that journey,
Yeah.
and I think before you had a great life and you celebrated with maybe food and alcohol a little bit more than what you do now.
Yeah.
And I think seeing you change in that way and appreciate probably nature and being more active as a way of sort of rewarding yourself and finding that contentment.
Yes.
Is so much more positive. And what I like to think of is, had you not had cancer, had you not made those changes, where would you be in 15 years? And would you have found that same level of contentment that you're now finding from, taking a hike through the woods? And
I don't think so. Yeah, I think we might have made some health decisions for different reasons, but not for the right reason. Cancer was a bloody big motivator. I think for that 4 months, particularly going strict keto and all of that, I was incredibly disciplined. I had a great motivator to do it. Whereas, often you try those things and you drift in and out of it because there's nothing really motivating you. For me, it was my life. It was like there's no bigger motivator than, you're living.
Yeah.
And so, I think if I'd not had it, I don't think I'd have understood how far I could push myself.
Yeah.
And so therefore now, how far I can push myself, and decision making is different, and the choices you make and the focus on wellness, well-being is so critical to us now. We've been to retreats, we make a lot of food ourselves now to cut out preservatives and all. We just cook natural stuff. We've got a Zen room set up, so we meditation and yoga and sound healing and all of that sort of thing, and our outdoor spaces, and we've now built a life around us and well-being and contentment and peace, and that is so valuable. And I wish I'd done that years ago, but I think I've had to go through this to get there.
Yeah, it's a pretty significant wake-up call that a lot of people are faced with it, and they don't know which direction to go. They get stressed. They don't know what questions to ask, and tend to sort of crumble in it. I mean, it's completely understandable under the circumstances because you don't know what's going on within you. But I think providing that structure, following the structure, working on yourself, focusing on the things you can control.
Exactly.
Over those 3 or 4 months, you must have felt like you were reclaiming some of your health, where you know that the PSA level was an issue, but when you're bettering your triglycerides, your cholesterol, bringing your PSA levels down as well through natural remedies, through eating better, being more active, that sort of changes your mindset a bit. Did you find that? Or
yeah, absolutely. I think in a few ways, and I mean certainly the one way is that I proved to myself that I could do it, and that by doing it, the cause and effect. And seeing really tangible outcomes, really tangible positive outcomes for me. And then, just sort of how you can... I thought I'd sort of lost focus in life. Not to the extent that it was a negative, but it was just like I was drifting and thought I did have a happy life, But now I just... I think I got a lot of myself back. I'd worked really hard in the years leading up to this, running a large organisation, 160 staff, and I'd really devoted a lot of my life to work and making things happen that way. And I guess we were fortunate that owning our own business, I didn't have to go into work every day, and I wonder how people who do have to continue to go to work while they're going through that treatment, how stressful that must be. But yeah, I was able to sort of, I guess, rediscover myself and the strength I did have, and all the things that I'd done in the past that had made me the person I was.
Yeah.
And I think I'd forgotten who I was. And so finding that again has been really important to me. And I think partly that's why sort of our life has changed in terms of the people we have in our life now.
So what's for the future?
Oh, the future, yeah, God. Well, look, we've got our own business, which we love, but we're really focused on ourselves and food. I love cooking, and
I love eating your cooking.
and I want to follow that. I mean, I've done a lot of cooking in my life, and I've worked in hotels and cafes and bars and all of that sort of thing prior to working in the disability sector. And I want to use food as a way to connect with people and to share what we have with people, and not to force anything down anyone's throat, but just good food and slowing down and, you know,
Actually
life
tasting it.
and tasting it and just using that time for conversation and connection and sharing, you know, things we've learned and learning from other people and that sort of thing. And I think life will bring us what it brings us by doing that, by who we connect with. Yeah. And we're happy just moving along that way at the moment. You know, ultimately, Holly would love a second-hand bookshop cafe. And I'd like to get that at some point for her. We're not sure when that'll be. Whatever we do, we want to do together. We want to be back just working together and doing something that we really, really love and enjoy. But the most important thing for us is just that connection with people and sharing and, yeah, just giving.
You've done incredibly well to handle such a shocking way of discovering that you've got cancer, to turn that around into something which is really, really positive. You know, you've had a pretty big year, haven't you, getting married?
Yeah, it's been a huge, huge term. And just, I hadn't thought about the journey a lot. We'd gone through that, and we've sort of, you know, we're looking forward and that sort of thing. And it wasn't until you asked me to do this interview, I started sort of reflecting on it. And it's been quite an emotional few weeks, just thinking about what we did go through and what we've achieved in that, in terms of being better people. You know, and for that, I've got to fucking thank Colin.
Yeah.
You know,
he's left the building.
He's left the building, but he left his mark.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you, Evan, and thank you, Colin.
Yeah.
Appreciate you taking the time to have a chat with me about this, and I think it's
thank you.
It's an important message to get out to people that you know, number one, get checked.
Without question.
You don't have to have a finger up your bum.
No,
it's just
easy now.
It's just a blood test when you're going to get your yearly blood tests.
Yep.
You know, and be proactive about it. Ask questions.
Connect with people.
Connect with people
who've been through it. They're the best source of information, and yeah, don't be afraid to just open up about it.
I think that's important, but it's also important to note that not everyone's going to have a positive outcome and a positive view on it. And sometimes, you know, people will have, you know, basically when you get diagnosed with cancer, you're at a crossroads. There's a big wake-up call, and you've got to make a decision, really, haven't you? You've got to go, well, do I just go, fuck it, continue the same habits which probably contributed to developing cancer?
Yes.
And that's one of the things which kind of shits me about the medical professionals, is they don't really discuss, you know, what the habits that you have,
correct,
whether they contributed to you getting cancer and changing your diet or anything like that.
Yep.
So people go and have chemo, they basically kill all the cells, and then all the good cells and the bad cells.
Yep.
And then they continue the same habits, and then they get cancer 2 years down the track, and they think, well, why did I get cancer again? Why me? You know, I've got such bad luck. But that's right. That doesn't get addressed. Or you can take your approach and go, well, fuck it, you know, I've got 4 months. I'm going to better my health by eating better, being more active, looking at, you went to a naturopath, we had a discussion about your diet, and you stuck to it amazingly.
Yeah.
And, that's what my book is about, controlling the odds. You can't guarantee that you're going to come out of it unscathed, but you can control some things.
You
and
can give yourself the best chance you
by
can.
focusing on what you can control is going to give you a much more positive mindset.
Yep.
And give you back a little bit of that control.
Yeah, you feel like you are in charge of your own destiny. And just going to what you were saying before about not everyone has a positive story, that's so true. And I think that's one of the downsides of the Facebook groups was occasionally you would see someone who hasn't had the symptoms, late diagnosis, given weeks to live. And they were hard to read, and sometimes Holly would just say, just don't look.
Yeah.
Don't look at that story, particularly if I was in one of those down times. But it is a sad reality. Not everyone comes out and everything's roses. There's a lot of men die from it.
Yeah.
And that can change.
Yeah. Don't stick your head in the sand.
No. That's it.
A lot of people do, They just don't want to know. Just stick your head in the sand, it's going to go away.
Yeah, and they just go through the treatment, like you say, then just go back to living life how they did. And I don't know how. Yeah, look, I don't know how. Everyone's different, and I can only go on my own experience, but I hope that by you doing this and allowing us to share our stories, that more people do sort of just be a little bit more proactive, because it's your life.
It is, yeah.
And it's going to be impacted some way, but you can control how much that is, I guess, to an extent.
Well, thanks, Evan, for taking the time to talk to me and share your fairly personal story. But I think it's really important to get that message out that younger people can get cancer, get checked regularly, take a proactive approach. But yeah, is there anything else you'd like to add before we sign off?
No, look, thank you for the opportunity to share that, and hopefully that contributes to other people having a more positive journey. And men, talk about it. Don't be embarrassed by any of it. Get checked, and hopefully you can get on top of things before anything gets too serious.
Yeah.
And have a great bloody life afterwards.
Yeah.
I'm proof of that.
That's right. Cheers, mate.
Cheers.